All good? Cool. Well, thank you, man, for being here.
Yeah.
I realized that, I've never really gotten a chance to connect with you.
Yeah, not for more than like 5 minutes
Yeah.
at some event or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exchange a few little nice pleasantries and then move on.
Yeah, we're so busy
Yeah.
normally.
Yeah. So I was curious, like, I remember you showed up here like a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were just
Yeah.
like looking for Wi-Fi or something.
Well, that was like 2.5 years ago.
2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the Wi-Fi stage.
Yeah.
That's the first stage for every yogi, right? They draw you in with the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, he was searching for a signal.
Searching for bars.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was your life like back then? What was going on?
Right then, I had just moved to the area from Lake Tahoe. I was working for California State Parks as a park aide in Lake Tahoe, and we had a big fire that was called the Caldor Fire. You may have remember that one. It kind of tore through Sierra Tahoe, Highway 50, and all the way up to South Lake Tahoe.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a big fire, and it caused the parks to basically be shut down for the season. Even though it was only the beginning of September, we usually stay open until mid-October. But the very beginning of September, it got so smoky and so hazardous to human health that we couldn't let people in the parks anymore because you shouldn't be outside, you shouldn't be hiking, you shouldn't be doing any of that.
Right.
So they kept us for a couple weeks just to make sure people weren't breaking the rules, basically. But then it was kind of you're out of a job all of a sudden. It was a seasonal job, but the season ended early.
Right.
And so what ended up happening is a job that I had applied to a year before and had totally forgotten about just happened to call me, a ranger from here at Malakoff Diggins, which is a park just down the road from Ananda. They just called me out of the blue. And while this fire thing was happening and while I needed another job immediately, another place to live. And so I said, I'll come check it out. And so the fire is raging, and I take off from Tahoe on my weekend. As this is happening, it's smoky all the way over here. I drive all the way over here. It's still smoky when I get here. It's just a really eerie scene. But as soon as I get up on the ridge where Ananda is located, I just get this feeling that, yes, this is where I want to live. It wasn't even to the park yet. I was only on the ridge, and I was near Ananda, which is interesting to reflect on, too.
Yeah.
So I got down to the park, and she toured me around, the ranger, and she showed me where I would be living, and I was just immediately in love with everything. I got to live in a little ghost town down at North Bloomfield at Malakoff Diggins. I was living in the top. They offered me this top attic space. So it was like this most people would probably find it creepy and hard to access attic space with like a ladder to get up to my room. But I was like up with the birds. When I looked out these two swinging windows out the sides of the attic, I was up in the trees with the birds. I even remember a bird's nest up there with me. And so I was in this beautiful space. And I said, of course, yes, I want this job. Yeah. And they were ecstatic to have me because they really needed somebody. And so that's how I ended up here. And through that, I was exposed to Ananda. And just to sort of locate myself spiritually at that point, I had begun while I was living in Tahoe that summer to really more earnestly seek peace or even communion through meditation. I was searching many different traditions for a sort of technique that would work for me, or a practice that would I don't know, bring some sort of deeper meaning to my life. I had found a lot of deep meaning through nature and through serving the public in nature and through creativity and the programs I was able to offer, especially when I got to Malakoff Diggins. But as for my own inward practice, I was still searching, but I did find myself going off in the woods that summer while all of my roommates were drinking and partying at the dorms. I would just walk up into the woods with my yoga mat and meditate for an hour or so, and then I started bowing and prostrating myself. I didn't know why. I just started doing it.
Intuitively bowing?
Yeah, I think at the time I was thinking to like the great spirit and nature is what I was bowing to. And that's what I felt most resonating with me.
Yeah. Was nature always was that always a big part of your life, like spending time in nature? Did you grow up in California?
Yes, I grew up in Northern California.
Ah,
Yeah, just to backtrack a little bit, I grew up in Northern California, only about 3 hours away from here by road,
okay.
a place called Kelseyville, very near the Mendocino National Forest.
Ah,
That's where my family has a cabin out in the Mendocino National Forest.
okay.
And so I spent a lot of time hunting and camping out in the Mendocino National Forest.
Wow.
So I was introduced to nature through camping and then through hunting in a big way. And though I don't hunt anymore, I really appreciate my father for introducing me to camping and hunting,
Really?
because it put me in tune with nature and made me focus
Hmm.
my attention in such a way when I was hunting that I came to a greater understanding and a greater connection with nature
Hmm.
through having to focus in that way, and through exchanging, well, through seeing and having my food come to me in such a direct way.
Right.
It really helped me tune into like the natural processes. And I remember some of my very early experiences while hunting were very mystical experiences, where I would sit for hours by myself sometimes and just be looking over the land and considering, looking for an animal to hunt, but also just contemplating and just sitting. And it was one of the first experiences I had of being alone, without any family around, without anybody else around, in a really peaceful setting. And so that was a big experience in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I found that when I got older, what I wanted to do was give other people that experience. And so I went into parks work after college.
Because that helps get people out into nature and kind of have that similar experience.
Well, you hope so.
Yeah.
You hope so, yeah. And you
Mm.
try and provide that. And that's what I really wanted to do. And initially I was going to go into law enforcement with the park system. There's the rangers that carry the weapons, and that enforce the law in the parks and that protect the parks. That really attracted me, protecting and also informing people about nature and giving them an experience of nature.
Right.
Which has taken on a whole new dimension now that I've left the need for enforcing anything behind me. I don't feel like I want to be an enforcer. I don't feel like I need to work for the government necessarily in order to have that. And now I'm studying sharing nature with Bharat, and I'm going to be teaching sharing nature.
Oh, so you're following up on that.
Yes.
That's
yes.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
such a powerful thing. I think it's interesting what you were saying about connecting with nature, like the whole food process.
Mhm.
You know, it's like I think a lot of societies are so disconnected from that whole, that cycle of life that we're all a part of. I mean, I know, speaking for myself, growing up, I thought food came from like the store. You know, I just didn't know. I grew up in the city. You know, your vegetables just come from like this section over here in the store, and then
they might as well grow there, right?
Yeah, you just don't know any better when you're a kid growing up, but to be exposed to that at such a young age, I think it's super powerful. You know, and like just to establish that, not to establish a connection with nature, but to tune into the already established connection that we all have. That's really powerful. Was that a common experience, you think, for kids in your area?
I think it was a common experience to know where your food came from and to even hunt it yourself, because it was just a very rural area and there's farms everywhere. So a lot of kids work on farms. 4-H was big when I was in school. Hunting was big. 4-H is like the Future Farmers of America, FFA.
Oh, okay.
Kind of
yeah,
a
I've
thing.
never heard of that before. But
they participate in growing crops, and they also raise livestock for selling at auction. So they get to participate in that, like where the food comes from, basically. So that was big. I never did that myself. I just hunted.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that it's a common experience for a more common experience for rural kids
Mm-hmm.
to know where their food comes from and to have a connection with that. And I think that is grounding in a really, can be grounding in a spiritual way, but at least grounding in a physical way where you kind of, you're just more connected to that
Right.
source.
Right.
Hmm.
Which for many people is the physical becomes like it's a doorway into the spiritual. You know, I think so many people connect with meditation and the deeper teachings of yoga might just start out as they go to a yoga postures class once a week with their friend. And then
Mm,
it's like you start to, through the body, you think, oh, maybe there's something more here, something more to like
yeah.
discover. What do you think was like that first real shift for you? You said you were out in nature for hours, just kind of being with nature.
Mhm.
Was there a certain moment or point or experience that like shifted, like took it more into that spiritual dimension? Or is there anything that comes to mind?
I know that there were some initial experiences of just when my father would let me, first started letting me go out and hunt by myself. He'd be like, "Oh, meet me at the bottom of that canyon over there." And it was like, 3 miles and 3,000 feet down. I was like, okay,
You're
I can do
7 years
that.
old with the
Yeah, with the big rifle and scrambling through the brush,
yeah.
getting kind of lost, but eventually finding my way. And he trusted me enough at 13 years old
Hmm.
to do something like that, and to carry a weapon as well. I mean, there was a lot of trust there. And so I appreciated that freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during that time that the first few experiences of just being alone out there and sitting in one place for a long time and then moving. It's sort of like that nice balance between physical movement and then sitting in meditation or
Mm-hmm.
contemplation. That I don't know. It tuned me in, like you were saying, with a yoga class. Somebody taking a yoga class one time and or a few times with their friends, and that opens a doorway. It
Mm-hmm.
sort of just opened this doorway where I would have this really, uplifting, really, enlivening experience of like running through the woods and going through little creek beds and coming out the other side and maybe seeing an animal run by or even shooting at one,
Mm-hmm.
and then having this experience of like
Mm.
sitting with that. And so that mix of physicality and, uh,
Stillness.
stillness
Mm.
was really profound for me. And that's still sort of the pattern that I set my life after, reflecting on it now,
Really?
is that I like to get a lot of physical exercise and also balance it with stillness
Mm.
during my day.
Right.
A lot of physical, like adventure or play.
Mm-hmm.
And play can take so many forms. I've been thinking so much about it
Really?
lately. Yeah, I mean, play can be watching your favorite movie or a favorite show.
Mm-hmm.
Play can be, what most people would see as horrible exertion in the gym of lifting heavy, horrible weights, and that can be play for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be absolute pain or suffering for another. And
Yeah.
so we all tune into play in a different way. And I found that mix of play and stillness,
Mm.
is where I find my, bliss.
Ah,
Hmm.
that's pretty profound because it's so easy to lose sight of the play. It's easy to get serious about life, and
Hmm.
just to keep that element alive is so important. We a few interviews ago I had Nitai on. Do you know Nitai?
Oh yeah, he's been
Yeah.
at the meditation retreat.
Yeah. So we
Yeah.
were talking all about EFL, and one of the things that stood out to me about your experience was just the balance of we talked in that interview about how kids need their will challenged. They need
Mm.
adventure. They need to like push their limits.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
I think it's something that's so lost today. We're so easily entertained, and like kids just have their devices.
Hmm.
You don't have to leave the house, and you're so stimulated all the time.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I feel like it's starting to come into a balance. I think people are starting to realize how much is missing by just being so in their technology. stimulated through a movie, through social media,
Mhm.
that I
Mhm.
think people are really craving for that outdoors experience, just to get outside and like look up into the sky. It's for many people, I know it was in my life, was a big like turning point. Like just going camping one night, like looking up and seeing like, oh, there's more than like the 5 stars I grew up seeing in the city.
Oh,
Like, there's
yeah.
a whole sky out there.
Yeah.
You know, it's such an expansive experience. I just think that's how our society was so gets gotten out of balance. And I think there's just like these simple ways that can bring it back into balance,
Mm.
you know? And so do you feel like you always had the desire to share this with people too, or was that something that came later?
I don't know. I think as a teenager and as a kid, you don't really think much about other people. If I can make that
True.
statement,
Yeah. Controversial.
a controversial statement, possibly doesn't resonate with everybody's experience. There are
Hmm.
certainly precocious kids who love sharing, but I think when I was younger, it was more about absorbing and receiving all
Hmm.
of those things. And it wasn't until it wasn't until I got into college age that I think I had reached a level of awareness where I could recognize that other people had a similar reality to me or had the potential to have a similar reality and also had very different aspects to their reality
Hmm.
than I did. So I just started to recognize and empathize with other realities.
Hmm.
And I found that when I was able to share my thoughts in such a way or my experiences
Hmm.
with people around nature or around ideas, I was very much a young philosopher when I got into college and loved discussing ideas. And when I was able to do that, I felt a sort of resonance with other hearts and minds that was really satisfying.
Hmm.
That was really um, completed a circle of some sort. And so when I started feeling that's when I wanted to bring other people into my experience and also give them as much as I could, make a space or facilitate for them to have their own experience of nature because at that point, nature was the most profound medium for
Hmm.
spirituality that I had found. And it still is. I would
Hmm.
still say that. I just now have an inward life through meditation that is another medium that
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily require an outward thing like a plant or
Hmm.
like a landscape or an animal to produce that experience or to go into those depths.
Right.
But at that time, that was my medium. That was everything to me,
Hmm.
and I wanted to share it with people for whatever reason. I wasn't content with being a hermit
Yeah.
or just going on hikes by myself, which some people are. Some people don't feel the drive to share with others. But for me, it was a big experience
Yeah.
sharing with others. And now through sharing nature,
Hmm.
the activities, that I just feel so blessed
Yeah.
that I found that. It's
It
beautiful.
yeah, and the sharing nature, it actually ties in really well with education for life. There's a lot of crossover.
Mhm.
And what you were saying, it just reminded me of something that one of my mentors said. He said it's the nature of bliss to want to share itself.
Mm.
And so like finding something that brings you bliss, like to really take you to that a deep state, ecstatic state, it's natural that you want to share that with somebody else because it's like it's an expansive energy and it
Yeah.
wants to be experienced by other people. So
Mhm.
I think nature is such a powerful. I always thought it was so interesting, kind of the dual meaning of sharing nature. And on the outside, it's like, yeah, sharing, it's taking people out into nature and helping share an experience
Mm.
of that.
Mhm.
But I also thought of it like a couple of years ago that it's also about like cultivating a sharing nature within yourself, like the nature that keeping yourself in that state of consciousness where you're wanting to share, where you're wanting to give to other people.
Mm.
And just that inner and outer kind of play on words with that sharing nature. I think it's so fitting.
Mhm.
How did you? How have you gotten involved with sharing nature recently?
That's an interesting story because it ties in with when I first came to the village and first started visiting Ananda, which happened through a sort of slow process of driving by Ananda every day when I was working at Malakoff, and I would be like, I need to stop there.
Yeah.
Because I studied history in college, and my final senior thesis for my bachelor's degree was on two counterculture intentional communities, spiritual communities, over on the coast in Sonoma County, where I was living. And so I was very interested in intentional communities. And a girlfriend at the time had told me that she wanted to do the karma yoga program at the village and told me about it. She ended up not doing it, but I was interested in everything about that. And so I drove by a few times, and then I think it was a couple months till I was settled in my new house and my new job that I actually came to the village. And that's where my journey with sharing nature began. That I think it was the first time I visited the village, because I was walking down by Lotus Pond behind our Temple of Light. And the first person that I met on a walk at Ananda, I think I had met a couple other people, was Bharat himself. He was walking around. He was walking around the pond, the only person I saw down there. And we hit it off and just started talking. And he showed me the camera activity. He showed me. I was down by the pond like, okay, this guy is just like touching my face now. And he's standing behind me and he's making me take pictures with my mind. And it was really sweet. And I asked him who he was, and he said Bharat, and he said, oh, I also am called by Joseph Cornell. And I recognize that name.
Really?
Because during a training for my job, for my naturalist position, we had watched his video on building a tree, which is one of the activities. That old video from like the 70s, you know, and it's kind of cheesy, but it's good. And I had watched that, and so when he said that name, I recognized him. And I said, wow, I've actually read your part of your book, and I've seen some of your videos. And he said, oh, that's great. You know, he's like, we could always use people to teach. And I didn't think about it for a while after that, although it was a cool experience, and I remembered it. And so that's how it began. And then when I ended up, just to go back in a little bit to my journey with Ananda, how I found Ananda was through the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
For work, because we didn't have good Wi-Fi at Malakoff, and so I'd come up to the village, to the market, and use the Wi-Fi. And then I was interested at that time, as I alluded to earlier, about deepening my spiritual practice. And my question in my mind, or my intention was, I want to see what happens if I make spirituality the center of my life, instead of it just being this side thing, this meditation I do that just feels like, I don't know, it doesn't feel dynamic for some reason to me. It didn't feel dynamic. It felt like something that I was playing around with, and I didn't want to play around so much anymore. I wanted to see what would happen. It was like, what will happen if I make it the center of my life?
Right.
And so I go into the reception center at Ananda Village, talk to Gloria in there. Wonderful. Wonderful presence. I'm charging my laptop. They're letting me charge it in there. You know, we're just gabbing every time I go there now. And she tells me, oh, we have retreats, because I had expressed some interest in a retreat. She's like, yeah, we do retreats at the Expanding Light, which is our main retreat center, but you live down there at Malakoff, and that's a pretty far out place. Maybe you would like the meditation retreat. And I was like, meditation retreat? She's like, yeah, we have a separate property. It's way out in the woods. Wow. And that's where people go deep. And I was like, okay, I want to go deep. I want to make it the center of my life. And so I signed up for a silent retreat. And that's when things really started moving and shaking in my life.
Really?
Because almost immediately, well, a few months after I signed up for it, or a couple months, I lost my job at Malakoff. I lost my housing, so I therefore lost my job through some strange circumstances, and I had to move. And that exact same weekend that I was supposed to move to my new job in the Eastern Sierra at a place called Bodhi, which is a ghost town out there.
You just love ghost towns.
I guess I got some ghost town karma or something. I spent some time there as a gold miner or something because I kept getting attracted to these places.
Yeah.
Though I was never interested in gold rush history before.
No?
No, I just happened to end up there and really ended up taking a fascination in it.
Yeah, I mean, we're in like the heart of the gold country. You know,
Yeah.
like what used to be in the heyday, like one of the main hubs was this Nevada City, Grass Valley area.
Totally.
Um,
Totally.
I'm always amazed that you were able to stay in that place. That town always creeped me out. I always felt like there's still people there. Like,
Yeah.
all those old prospectors still
Oh, yeah.
waiting to hit it big.
You're not the only one. I mean, if you consider that energy holds us here on this planet, our energy when we die, they had a lot of unresolved energy.
Yeah.
So if you believe in spirits, or if you even entertain the idea, that would be the place where there would still be spirits lingering, I would think, because there's so much intense energy still around.
You would think, and
Yeah.
all the colorful characters that would be attracted to a gold rush.
Yeah, and all the people that died in those towns too. It's like
Yeah.
there's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go back. Bharat, he is just a character, and he's like masterful at guiding those experiences. And I'd love to have him on
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah.
What were your first impressions of like the sharing nature activities that he put you through?
Yeah, I guess my first impressions were, since I didn't know the depth of sharing nature. To me, I had seen the video of building a tree.
Mm-hmm.
I had read a little bit of sharing nature with children, and then I had gotten the camera game. So I thought, this is a very charming older man who has some cute activities for kids, and that's wonderful. And maybe I'll use these at some point on one of my tours for kids.
Mm-hmm.
I had thought that, but I didn't know at the time, and now I'm just beginning to really tune into the depth of flow learning and of the sharing nature enterprise, and how big it is and how big it's going to be, similar to Ananda, and that I predict it being a major moving, possibly even revolutionary force in the future for changing consciousness. I think that they're going to dovetail, and they're going to both be profound forces for that change.
Yeah. So what made you want to study communities when in college? Because I think it's kind of related.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I went into that class, my senior thesis class, thinking I wanted to study communities, but we had a bunch of proprietary, meaning that the college had sole ownership of all these documents relating to these two communes, because they were near where my college was at Sonoma State University.
Okay.
So they had all these special documents, and I was like, man, what am I going to do? I have to write about history of place, which is a specific lens that you can put on history.
Okay.
How do places influence meaning for people? How do we build meaning around places? And so that was the lens that our class was looking through. And I looked around for a while, and then I had always been interested, or for a long time, in the counterculture. The 60s and 70s were just fascinating. All these people, abandoning old conventions, embracing foreign philosophies, exotic philosophies, and rebelling against society in a really strong way. And all the music and imagery that's around it too just captivated me.
Yeah.
So when I found these two really cool, very unique communes that existed in the late 60s and early 70s in Sonoma County out on the coast, I was just fascinated by it. And so that's why I started studying that. And then I think on a deeper level, though, I was interested in community because I craved community. I really craved in my life something meaningful between people. And I think also my desire to share my experiences and the experiences of nature I had and my ideas. Ever since I was very young, my family was very nuclear, and not so close emotionally to each other or to the world, really. So I craved a community of people that supported each other and that freely shared ideas
Hmm.
and resources. It just
Hmm.
seemed like a very good thing to me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the deeper reason that I started studying or wanted to study them, and then ended up finding Ananda and was very attracted to here as well.
Interesting. It's funny how those early desires and they just guide you without you even realizing. Like you said, the hunting experiences you had as a kid were really propelling you through life, but you don't even realize it at first. They were influencing your decisions, and even the
Yeah.
thought to study places and meanings and like to be guided eventually in the future. I always find it so interesting in talking to people as they tell you their life story. Going forward doesn't really make sense, but then they look backwards and they go, oh, that connected to that,
Yeah.
which is so interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And I think there's still that countercultural revolution happening. It's taken different forms.
Yeah.
I think there's so many in our generation, particularly, that are just like fed up with the current status quo, the way things are going. They find it hard to see a future for themselves in the current flow of events,
Mm-hmm.
and they're seeking alternatives. And I do think that's why things like sharing nature, and as you see this explosion of people sharing spirituality, community, you getting back to gardening and just growing your own food. It's happening like before our eyes, which is so interesting to see.
Mm-hmm.
And even and coming to a place like Ananda, which started back in the 70s, and it's like it's happening before our eyes. Like those people are still there and they did it and they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And now more people are doing it. I think it was so much thought of as like kind of like a pipe dream
Mm-hmm.
back then.
Yeah.
But to actually see it like, oh, this works.
Yeah.
Yeah. What has your experience been of community so far?
Um, well, it's been looking back on it now over the past year that I've been here. It's been the most important experience of my life. The most important event of my life has been moving here. Um, and my experience of community and in general is very positive and a little surprising because of what I studied in college. In those communities, they only lasted, I mean, Morning Star lasted for about 3 years, and then Wheeler's Ranch, which was its next evolutionary stage,
Huh.
the next property that they were able to find, that lasted about 4 years, and then they failed.
Hmm.
So seemingly because of outside forces in that case, the county coming in and
Right.
using building codes to tear them down,
Hmm.
but also there was internal problems as well. And so I didn't have a very optimistic view of, do communities actually work?
Ah,
Can
right.
they actually work? Because most don't for
Hmm.
very long. There's a few that do, and I was hopeful, maybe not optimistic, but I was hopeful
Mm-hmm.
that at least they would work. I never saw myself really living in a community.
Right.
I was open to it, which is maybe why it came into my life.
Hmm.
Um, but so far, my experience of Ananda has just been um, surprisingly uh, positive
Hmm.
and surprisingly, um, it's a revolutionary place
Hmm.
that we can come together over these core teachings and these core practices,
Mm-hmm.
and with the intention of just living our truth and living the truth of the teachings in such a way that that's what really holds it together, is that we're all in deep pursuit of joy and
Mm-hmm.
deep pursuit of God,
Mm-hmm.
which is joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which that in its thought in itself is revolutionary. Redefining. It's such a loaded word. Right? God. It means so many things.
Yeah.
It means something totally different to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But when you boil it down to joy, bliss, and peace, like things you can actually experience,
Mm-hmm.
it just makes it all more real,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's the beauty of yoga, is that it's not belief, it's like experience. Let your experience take you deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazing to see how that, it's just like the grease in the machine for a community. Like
Mm.
without some practice, something to kind of like get people out of their own egos
Mm-hmm.
to take part in something larger than themselves. If you don't have that, yeah, there's a reason all those communities fail, because everybody just wants for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
the opposite of a sharing nature.
Yeah. 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 It's kind of a taking nature.
Yeah,
I
which is
mean, the Back to the Land movement, which a lot of people early, I've been reading about a lot of the members early in Ananda's history.
mm,
They wanted this to be a back to the land sort of subsistence
mm-hmm,
community. That was their vision when they came here, and they didn't really feel any major draw to Yogananda's teachings or
mm-hmm,
to Swami. They wanted that back to the land experience.
mm-hmm,
They wanted their little plot of land with their crops on it and their family, and they maybe wanted to cooperate with a larger community,
mm-hmm.
but more, I think, taking it in for themselves. Like, this is
Right,
our experience.
right,
This is my family's experience. This is my how I'm going to find happiness.
yeah,
And I think what Ananda has keyed into that's made it so successful is this element of service,
hmm,
which is in our teachings,
right,
is that it's that my ultimate bliss and my happiness actually depends on the happiness of others. That
hmm,
I can actually flip, I can flip the lens of my life away from myself. And when I actually focus more on the well-being of others and on the community, I find that my own well-being
hmm,
is elevated greatly. It's
right,
just expansive.
right,
And I find myself forgetting about my worries and my problems
hmm,
and about my ego, and I find myself just more and more content and joyful in the joy of others and in the
right,
joy of God that I feel within, whatever God is for you, you know,
yeah.
the joy, the joy of inner joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so counterintuitive though, right? The
Mm.
way to get for yourself is to give. I mean, that's what they say, right? If you want to feel loved, start by loving other people. If you want to experience prosperity, be more generous.
Mm-hmm.
And it's completing that cycle. You know, if you're only taking, you only have half the cycle. It's going to run dry at some point.
Yes.
You know, and you see it. It's interesting just thinking about that with the mining that happened here. They were just taking from the land,
Mm-hmm.
and without ever any thought of like giving back to the land that's providing
Mm.
for them. And you see it's just like still there's just remnants of that devastation.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that died down. And the people in this county, it's interesting because it was proposed a few years ago to open up another mine, but the whole community, the whole county, basically like en masse was said no,
Mm.
that's not happening again, because in some ways they're still feeling the negative environmental impact of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully we've learned from that. We just don't want to go down that road again.
Yeah.
So it's encouraging, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to see ourselves learning and evolving
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about community too, is that you can see what attitudes work for people and what attitudes really don't work. So like you see people that are, yeah, more selfless, more generous, they seem happier.
Mm.
And you see people that are more taking for themselves, they don't seem to be as glowing, they don't seem to be as joyful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beauty of community, is you get to see all of these experiments running.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the results of the experiments of the thought. You know, where does that thought take you? Where does that thought take you?
Mm-hmm.
I always found it was a really cool blessing. I was born the youngest of 6 kids.
Mm.
So I had like 5 trials before me. So I'm the youngest, like, okay, my sister did that. Okay. That takes you there. He did this. That takes him there. Okay. So I
Yeah.
got to, like, from a young age, kind of like see what the playing field was like through their experience.
Yeah.
And that really helped a lot.
Well, it's good that you were aware enough to tune into that and to take that lesson from each one of them.
Right.
Yeah, rather than just saying, "Oh, I'm going to do my own thing," you know,
Right.
because none of their experiences actually is valid to me. But you
Right.
said, oh, it is valid in a way that I can learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you have siblings? Are you only child or
I have one younger brother,
one younger brother? What's
hmm
his name?
Ben.
Ben.
Yeah.
Nice. What does your family feel about you being here?
I think I don't think they fully understand why I'm here, although
Mm.
they're supportive. Um, my mom just unconditionally, like moms are usually, just unconditionally supportive. If you're happy, honey, then I'm happy.
Such a
Just come
mom.
home sometimes, you know.
Call.
Yeah, call. And my dad supportive, but not much less understanding in a way of
Mm.
just, he's from a generation and a profession as a police officer and a mindset, or a worldview, you could say, of how you become happy in life is upward mobility
Mm.
and financial security. I mean, that's just
Right.
that's his shtick.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's always trying to give to us, is
Mm-hmm.
a lot of financial advice and life advice um, around having all your ducks in a row
Mm-hmm.
and being materially secure, and then that's going to be it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. And so he often asks me like, when are you going to get a real job, kind of a thing,
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
you a gardener?
Uh-huh.
A gardener is for a retired person. That's not even a real job.
You can't
That's
skip to the end.
you can't skip it, man. You're not even 30 yet,
Yeah.
and you're already feeling retired.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't understand, but he is supportive, and so that's been cool to see. My brother is in a similar place. He's younger. He's younger than me, so
Mm.
he's 27 right now, or he just turned 28, and so he is very much into the um, festival scene.
Ah, right.
So that's an extension of the counterculture right there. That festival scene of,
It's an experience.
yeah, it's an experiment and an experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it has its hedonistic elements,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it also has its very conscious elements of, they do lots of yoga classes during the day and they meditate and
Mm.
they offer all of these things. So it's an amazing sort of mirror image of our society, I think, at those
Hmm.
festivals right now, especially for
Interesting.
the younger generation.
Really, that's where they're finding that something different. That's where they're going for the kind of
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah, and in this age of energy and Dwapara Yuga, they are experimenting with energy in a huge way. That
Mm.
electronic dance music,
Yeah.
the drugs,
Yeah.
the high energy scene, the uh, clothing, the everything, the
Mm-hmm.
colors, the getting together, the combining group energy. So
Yeah.
my brother is into that, and so he can kind of key in that, a community, because he finds community at those festivals. He knows a bunch of people
Right.
from the festivals. That's his community.
Mm-hmm.
Those are his tribe, his people. So he can recognize that a community is a good thing
Mm-hmm.
and an end in itself almost.
Right.
And for us, it's not an end in itself, right?
Yeah.
For
It's a
us,
means to an end.
it's a means to an
Yeah.
end, and it just supports our deeper search for that ultimate truth.
Right.
Whereas, for younger people today, I think that um, community and um, group energy is an end in itself. That it
Mm-hmm.
has that quality of expansiveness and of
Mm-hmm.
losing your ego.
Hmm.
That's what I mean. A lot of people, he's always talking about these ego deaths that he and
Hmm.
others experience at these festivals through drugs, but
Mm-hmm.
also through dance, ecstatic dance experiences, the music,
Right.
activating all those chakras,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and so yeah. So my brother is understanding, my mom's understanding, and my dad he's there with me at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great to at least have support, even if it's like a neutral support. I've heard
Yeah.
stories of people that their brother calls, "I'm coming to get you," and they'll show up and try and drag you away, but they just don't understand. I think they come from a different consciousness where until you experience community in a certain way, it doesn't make sense. If
Mhm.
if you're not at that level, It's interesting hearing you describe your brother's experience. It really does sound like the 70s in 2024,
Yeah.
2025 now. But it's just, the clothing is a little different, the drugs are a little different, the music's a little different, but it's ultimately people seeking a different experience,
Yeah.
and wanting to change their consciousness, wanting to become a part of something more, really wanting to create some sort of change in the world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's cool. It's cool to see the revolution still alive and well.
Yeah.
And it's just taking different forms. And one thing I appreciate about the community too now is like, okay, some of my friends are like 50 years older than me. Some of my friends are the ones that were at those festivals in the 70s. And they have, all their friends were in that festival. I know one of my friends, she would go to these college parties where this band would play. It was like the house band, and that band later became the Grateful Dead. But they would play at these like college parties, and they would take acid and start experimenting with music, and like, so she was like part of that counterculture revolution for a while. But it's cool to see them now because you see the life that they took, the path that they chose, where they kind of let the drugs and the partying fall off, and they took up more of like a spiritual practice. And they could say, yeah, man, sometimes I'll see some of my old friends like at the beach, and they're still living that lifestyle, and it's just, they're like burnt out. It just didn't follow through with the promise. But I still think everybody, you need to go through and have that experience for yourself and kind of make that choice on your own. So it's like it's good that people are out there experimenting, experiencing, and like letting that energy guide them. But it's also cool to be in my perspective and see like, okay, that's what they did. I could skip a lot of skip a lot of the trials and heartaches.
Shortcut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about your dad too. Do you think he has any sort of spirituality behind the material kind of outlook on life?
Well, he always told me growing up, because I was an ardent atheist when I was a teenager, and I was very vocal about it.
Really?
And with him, with anybody who would listen, with the guy on the street, whoever. And so he would always say, well, son, if 3 billion people in the world believe in something, you might want to take a second look at it. He was talking about God, the concept of God. And when I was growing up, I grew up without religion. We never went to church. A couple of weddings at churches, and that was my only exposure to that. And it was only recently that he started through a difficult situation in his life. He actually began seems to have begun seeking, or at least being open to religion, and that he was going to church with his wife now, occasionally. But he was never interested in that before. So I think that I don't think that it's made an entrance into his life in a big way yet, or that he's going to like devote himself to that. But he, I think, does see beyond the material now in a way, or is beginning to, and that his journey. I think a lot of people, as they get towards that age, he's 66 years old now. You get closer to what's always a very close experience for us of death.
Right.
It just becomes much more obvious, I think, as you get within
Your
single
odds.
digits or,
Yeah.
within a dozen years of the likelihood of your own physical death.
Right.
That you start to think, is how I'm living actually, is this what it's all about? Is this all that there is? Especially if you've been living mostly a material life and without art or without any of these sort of deeper invisible meanings in life, then you start to think, well, maybe there is something else and I want to start exploring it. I think that's how a lot of people find their entry into spirituality.
Yeah, often it's a near-death experience or like a lot of suffering in life. They just need something different, or it is they start getting towards the end and they start asking questions. Hey, maybe I should think about this. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people, at least briefly, there's a time when they're in their 20s, in the early 20s, where they start to play with those questions about life. What's life all about? Is there anything after? Is there a God? What is anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But for so many people, it just gets put on a shelf
Mm-hmm.
until this later point of life.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything you could point to? Like, why do you think what made you choose to like explore it more now, as opposed to putting it on the shelf?
Putting it on the shelf for later. I think. Hmm. I think it was for me. What's coming to my mind right now is it was those nature experiences, and
Hmm.
it was okay. Well, what I'm going to do now, since I've had these profound nature experiences, and I want more of that, I'm going to work in nature. I'm going to make my career around nature. That was my plan.
Hmm.
I'm gonna surround myself with nature, and I'm going to bring other people to it too.
Yeah.
Which really means on a deeper level, I'm going to surround myself with God, and I'm going to bring other people to God too. So it was like a gateway drug, you could say.
Yeah.
So I had this gateway drug, man. That's how I got into it.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, and I did experiment with psychedelics as well, and that
Hmm.
opened up my reality to
Right.
something bigger.
Yeah.
That wow, there's like a whole nother, even just aesthetic realm to life. Like, not things are not as they seem all the time,
Hmm.
and it just opened me up to new feelings and perceptions. And
Right.
nature did that as well. But I thought I can just have my career in nature and be in that sacredness.
Hmm.
I can be in that sacredness, and I can help other people come to that, and that will be satisfying for me.
Hmm.
But what I found is that there was something incomplete about nature in its not nature in itself. There was something incomplete about thinking I could could coordinate or pin it down in such a way as
Hmm.
that I could pin down my life, and if I set it up in such a way to where I had these external things,
Hmm.
even if it's nature, which is beautiful and which is an expression of God's love,
Hmm.
if I have that external thing, then I will be satisfied. And what I found that I could be perfectly unsatisfied even surrounded by beautiful nature,
Right.
because
Hmm.
there's internal disharmony for some reason. And so I felt that internal disharmony, and it was like, man, how disappointing. I thought that this was going to bring me
Yeah.
perfect happiness. And yet I'm surrounded by nature for several years. I worked in nature for 5 years, and still I don't feel completely satisfied. Why is that?
Hmm.
And I think it was that questioning and that sort of dawning awareness that I'm not going to find satisfaction
Hmm.
just in the outward, that magnetized, or that drew the grace to me to find a spiritual path where I could begin to harmonize my inward reality. And that,
Hmm.
when you harmonize your inward reality, the outward manifestations are all in harmony as well for you.
Right.
And so I just came to realize that through meditation,
Hmm.
that I found that I can harmonize inwardly, and it doesn't matter so much now whether I have a career in nature, whether I'm in the mountains 24 hours a day outside,
Hmm.
that it doesn't matter what I'm doing or where I'm doing it. It matters how I feel inside.
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think that takes a long time for most people to come to, and I think that's one of the benefits, I think, of a kind of like an induced experience, whether it's through psychedelics or nature. Just that the experience of having your perspective change and realizing, oh, it's like it originates inward.
Mm-hmm.
This my whole experience of life originates inside.
Mm-hmm.
So even if everything out here is set in its place, which it never is. It's always like something's a little off, or as soon as you get it in place, the dominoes fall again. Like as soon as you turn your back.
Yeah, exactly.
But if it's all, even if it's perfect outwardly, if it's inwardly not, it's never going to be satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's such a powerful experience. It could be very daunting, though, if you don't kind of come upon any sort of tools or techniques to like, okay, how do I get my inner environment right?
Yeah.
You know, there's inner engineering. I think it's a phrase that Sadhguru uses, which I think is so perfect. Like, how do I get this inner life set up in such a way? You know, our Western culture, we're so trained to, we're very materially efficient. We know how to get the outward world set up. We know how to get our ducks in a row, like you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this inner teaching that we're kind of importing from India now,
Mm-hmm.
that we're kind of making our own and making it practical also.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, is that something that you, how do I want to ask this? So many people think it's black or white, or I can either choose the material path or the spiritual path.
Mm-hmm.
What I think people don't realize is that the material becomes born out of your inner experience. The inner experience starts to actually manifest the outward experience. So it's like, it's not an either or. But I think you said at the beginning, it's like making your core the spiritual, everything else will work itself out.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's something I think people confuse a lot. And it just isn't that way. I mean, has that been your experience?
Yeah, I think that being in the world but not of it, as Jesus spoke, is not easy. It's certainly not an easy project that we have, because the material things of this world are very attractive to us. I think that's why we're here,
Mm-hmm.
because we're attracted to this. But I do, as long as you have the core of that knowledge that God is the only true goal and the only final satisfaction that you're going to have in life, then you're, if you actually have that knowledge, I mean, that's self-realization.
Mm-hmm.
Then the material world is no problem anymore, because you're not pulled out of yourself into something else. But to say that you can have one foot in this world and one foot in the other, I don't know. As long as you have desires for this material existence, that are centered in this material existence and that are therefore ever changing, impermanent, fluctuating, then you're going to be pulled out of your center all the time. So having one foot in this world, meaning that you think, oh, I can straddle it, I can have my desires, and I can also be totally surrendered to reality and to God. You just can't do both.
Right.
So I think what you're saying is true, in that your spiritual core will align your material reality with harmony, and that you can live in this world without being of this world.
Right.
Is true. But as for like being able, like we all entertain at some point, oh, I can have a meditation practice, but still, still go out drinking every weekend with my friends, and, be very concerned with my image, and very concerned with having a lot of partners,
Right.
and desiring those things. I don't know if I do know, I don't think you can do both.
Right.
In my own reality. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you can. It's just not satisfying.
Yeah.
I think that's what you come to find is like, oh, this actually isn't what I worked it up to be. This desire, now that I've experienced it, it's like, oh, it doesn't really hold up. And that's the tricky thing. And that's where once you realize that, it's like, okay, just commit fully to the one. And then, but the cool thing is too, and this is, So something I've been finding out more in my life too is that the more I commit to my spiritual life, the more these desires are fulfilled of their own accord in the universe's timing. It's like I don't need to work for them. They'll
Mm,
come to me. It's like the desire, the energy is already there in my spine somewhere.
mm,
It's got this vritti, this whirlpool of energy. It's gonna come. But if I just focus all my energy inwardly on my spiritual practices, I don't need to go seek out the experience. Like it will come to you,
mm.
and then you kind of enjoy it with a different. Well, you enjoy it from a different perspective
Yeah.
because you know it's coming from the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the enjoyable part, is
Mm.
realizing, oh, it's actually the universe is conscious and it's playing with me. So
Yeah.
you enjoy it on that level as opposed to the ice cream cone or the concert or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You enjoy it from a whole nother consciousness, which is it's really something profound to experience,
Mm.
and it's something that I think it's something that's accessible to everybody. Not that I think it is something that's accessible to everybody.
Mm.
I think one of the other cool things about living in a community is like there's just so many normal people here. you know, we're all just normal people.
Uh-huh.
It's not like um, like we're high in the Himalayas in some like monastery somewhere. It's like, oh,
Mm.
we're down to earth, normal people that have just adopted a certain lifestyle. And it's cool because working at a retreat center too, you see people come from the Bay Area, from LA, and they're here for a week or two, and you just see their energy shift.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It's like you see them experiencing joy,
Mm.
and it's so cool to see because it's like it's always present for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's always readily available for people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a joy to be able to share these little techniques and tools and things that help people tune into it.
Yeah.
So it's exciting that you be doing that with sharing nature, because nature is a powerful tool, as you know, for connecting with
Mm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do you think is like? Do you see yourself leading retreats in the future, or?
That's the plan right now. We're talking about this coming summer doing 1 or 2 sharing nature retreats at the meditation retreat.
Oh, very fun.
Yeah, and Haridas and Roma are backing that fully. And they also want to invite some school-age children to the
Oh,
retreat
cool.
throughout the summer and do sharing nature days with them,
Hmm.
sort of day trips.
That's such a beautiful. Let's talk about that. Yeah. We've mentioned this retreat a lot and your job as a gardener.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that experience? Maybe just tell us where you work and what you do there and what that's like.
Yeah, I work at the Ananda Meditation Retreat, and we have a large 2-acre garden with exotic trees and plants from around the world in this coniferous forest environment. So this forest of conifers and oaks.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very unlikely garden. And Charles, the original gardener, who's now 85 years old, he still lives at the retreat. He's just amazed at the fact that this garden can exist at all. And so is any other botanist or gardener who comes there would be too. Because you don't plant a garden like this in the middle of an old growth
Mm-hmm.
conifer forest. We live in basically a desert up here.
Mm-hmm.
It may look very lush from like a sky, like airplane view, but you get down on the ground and there's a few shrubs underneath the trees, and it's just a very dry environment. Your hands dry out constantly, your lips dry out constantly, and so it was so unlikely, and he faced such difficulty in establishing the garden at first that he wasn't sure if it was going to work out. It was only through communicating with the plants that he was actually able, communicating as in tuning into their energy and receiving whatever sort of energetic messages were coming through from the plants. And at first they were not getting along. He had invaded their home and had started painting the walls and taking out the furniture while they were gone, and then they came home and they were not happy. The big trees were not happy. So he had to communicate with them, and he had to work with them in such a way that they have now allowed We can go that far to say that the nature spirit that is on that mountain has allowed this garden to exist.
Well, it's interesting because it's not even going out that far anymore. Because you ever see that movie about the fungi, like the mushrooms and stuff,
Oh
and
yeah.
how the whole forest is just communicating through like mycelia underneath the ground and like sharing nutrients and resources? It's like, oh, this tree is not just a tree; it's like a conscious being, and it is sharing. So in a way, it sounds far out, but it's like science is like coming around and like explaining it. Like, no, this is what it actually is happening.
Yeah, it is happening, and we're just beginning to see what sensitive shamanic type people have seen for thousands of years,
Right.
perhaps tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, that everything is interconnected and that we have the ability to communicate with every living being because we are consciousness. We are this energy that pervades all of reality. And so, of course, we can communicate with something that's so closely related to us as a tree. I mean, it's not, it even is on the same planet as us. It's almost the same age as us.
Well, it's like one Sadhguru said, that's like half of your lung right there.
Yeah.
Without that tree, you couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
So it's like, even in that sense, we're just like part of this interconnected web of life.
Yeah. We're interdependent in that sense.
So your responsibility now is maintaining the garden?
Yeah, just maintaining the garden and taking it into its next stage.
Yeah. Which
is going to be it's become very lush. It's become a very successful garden. But now we're running into problems of like not having quite enough like water pressure. It's these practical issues that we're running into, not spiritual issues. That's going great at the retreat. But these practical issues of water and electricity that are now we're going to have to start making some choices around what we keep in the garden and what we let naturalize. So it's a new chapter in the garden. And so it's fitting that a new gardener, I guess, has come along for this new chapter.
Well, how has that transition been? Because I mean, is that a new style for you to like feel, really connect with the plants on a deep level? Is that something that comes naturally to you, or is that something you're learning on the go?
Well, I've felt very strong connection to nature in the past, but as for actually opening myself to the possibility of communicating with plants or of tuning into their energies, or the fact that there's like nature devas, these spirits in the garden, that's all very new to me. And that's something that I'm just beginning to sort of scratch the surface of, this iceberg of plant consciousness and of consciousness in everything.
Yeah.
I mean, Charles says that the rocks have consciousness. He's tuned into that. He recognizes that. Your car has consciousness. Your fridge has consciousness. You can talk to it. You can make deals with it, if your heart is open and you believe, the belief comes first. If you really just believe that reality is not limited by our conceptions of reality, by our concepts, then and basically anything becomes possible.
Right.
And so anything is becoming possible for me. That's been the whole theme of my arrival at Ananda, is like, whoa, I was an atheist and now I believe in, the gurus and them still being omnipresent. And I believe that there are plant spirits, even if I can't see them.
Right.
So it's been a huge mind and heart opening experience for me. And I think that's been one of the lessons so far in the garden. A profound lesson is that there's something going on here that I can't explain with my previous worldview. And so I'm not going to try and explain it anymore. I just want to experience it. And so it's been a lesson in experiencing and opening myself up and listening more. And just all of these qualities that are very spiritual. I mean, being in a garden is a very spiritual place to be.
Right. One teacher I'd heard talk about, I said that most of the spiritual path is all about unlearning. Like unlearning what you think is true and let actually your experience of life tell you that's true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you have an experience of, yeah, it feels like, okay, this plant is telling me it needs water. But in my rational mind saying, no, that doesn't make any sense. This thing doesn't need water. But then it dies. You know, it's like, did you just limit yourself by what you thought you knew was true? And that's why that process of unlearning, just letting go of your preconceived notions of what life is,
Yeah.
and realize that it's much more profound than you think it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And just letting that kind of blossom and unfold naturally.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful process.
Yeah. Or else you close yourself off to it, and you only experience within the bounds of your conceptions, of your beliefs,
Yeah.
of what you have set out for yourself. We tend to experience, or it's a law almost, that we experience what we think is possible.
Mm-hmm.
We can only experience within the bounds of our own limitations, our own beliefs.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's a joke of this guy who said, somebody told him, if you pray hard enough, the mountain will move, but you got to believe. So he prayed. He looked out his window at the mountain that was, in his mind, blocking the view.
Mm-hmm.
He prayed for it, and he prayed for it. And he came back the next day and said, oh, I knew you'd still be there. Just even how much we are undercutting ourselves,
Yeah.
you know, working against ourselves in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, well, yeah, I think maybe we'll wrap it up here. I want to have you on again sometimes. I feel like there's still a lot more to get to. But thank you, man. This has been really fun.
Yeah, really
It's
fun.
been a pleasure to connect with you a little bit,
Yeah.
and to learn more about your story. And I think we're the same age, actually. Are you 29?
Yeah.
Same. Yeah. I never even we haven't even connected that much. And
yeah.
It's amazing how in a small community you still, you know, you really just need to give time to connecting with people on an individual level.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we have a shared common deep belief, but to not neglect these other connections too. So
yeah.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too, Jonica. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. Come back again. Awesome.